Hello Sonic Academy, this is Arveene and Misk with another one of our top tips for you. This is a tip we call a simpler build-up, and it's something that we just picked up along the way of producing with Ableton Live in the studio over the past few years. So we've just got a quick example set for you here. It's something we just made for the tutorial with some standard kind of housey beats and bass and whatnot, but I'll guide you through it just so you can hear what you're dealing with. Pretty standard housey beat there. A little bass line. A vocal here, which is just chopped up from an a cappella pack. Don't wanna be. Don't wanna be. Now the vocal is actually what we're going to use as part of our build-up, but I'll just guide you through the rest of the track here so you know what you're dealing with. A little glitchy thing, which comes in after the breakdown when it drops back in again. And we've actually put a filter on this, which you can see is automated just during the breakdown, just to build it up a little. A little riser and a bang sample, which makes it drop in on the breakdown. And a little white noise crash. So not really blazing any trails with this demo, but it should get the point across. So here's our little vocal section, which you already heard. Now I want to use that vocal section to actually become part of the build-up in this track. So I'm going to use a simpler to do it, and I'll show you what to do now. We need to create a new MIDI track with Command, Shift and T. I'm just going to rename this because that's what I do, and call it vocal build. Okay, so what we want to do now is get a little section of the vocal. So we'll get that, just that last don't, a little 1 beat long, and we will right click on it and do consolidate, or I could have done Command and J to do the same. And the reason why I'm consolidating is, what consolidating does is it takes a snapshot of a particular sample or a MIDI clip at that particular time. So why this can be useful is if you've got a 120 BPM vocal sample, or as you can see in the case of this one, 123 BPM, and it's warped to fit your 128 BPM set, if I was to drop this sample directly into Simpler, it would be at the wrong tempo. But what I've done now, because I've selected the amount of time that I want and consolidated, it takes a 1 beat length of this sample at 128 BPM and generates a new sample with those settings. So what I'm going to do is get a Simpler from our instrument panel here on the left hand side and drop it into this new MIDI track, and I'm going to drag this consolidated sample into our Simpler so you can see our little don't sample here. And what I'm going to do next is zoom out, select the entire length of our build up, and hit Command, Shift and M. And what that does is it makes a new MIDI clip, which is the entire length of our build up. Next step is double click down here on C3 and drag that to the entire length of our build up also. Now the reason I've picked C3 is if you've got any sample at any pitch, or it doesn't matter, in a sample pack or whether you've generated it yourself, to get the original native tempo and pitch of that sample, it'll always be at C3. If it was sampled at CD sampling rate, that is. But I'll try and avoid getting too technical. Now, I'm just going to play this portion, and you should hear that don't sample at its native tempo. Well, it'll be a good idea if I soloed it. So this is exactly what we want to start with. What I'm going to do now is loop that by double clicking here, selecting loop, and this sample should now loop in time. I'm going to switch on the metronome just to check. Perfect. So although the Simpler doesn't actually warp anything because we selected a consolidated sample at our warped length, it's all fitting in perfectly. So next thing, I want to quickly demo the transition between our original sample into this new simpler sample, just to make sure that the listener isn't aware that it's completely swapped over to a new track or a new effect. So we'll just make sure that it's kind of seamless as possible. So we might want to throw a bit of an EQ on it. I'm not sure if you can hear it there. It's a little bit duller because, as you can see in our don't wanna, we've got two effects. Well, what we can actually do is select these two effects with Shift and hold Alt and drag them into our new track. And what that's done is it will copy those directly over. So this should sound pretty similar. Okay, all sounds fine. Might just need a little bump up in volume. Okay, perfect. So next is make it interesting. Let's double click on vocal build, check out our sample here, click on the length transformer, and what that does is it changes the automation lane in our MIDI track to sample length. So I'm going to double click to put an automation point on here. We're going to let it loop a few beats at its normal tempo, and then I'm going to start tweaking it. So double click, add automation points along the way, and basically make it build up. It's like putting a tight loop on a CDJ. You'll hear the effect now. Okay, you get the idea now. It's sounding pretty good. Now I'm going to add some additional automation just to accentuate what's happening. I'm going to double click on this MIDI clip. I'm going to click on pitch bend in the envelopes, and I'm going to once again double click for an automation point and pitch bend this slowly up. I'll do the same thing that I did here. I'll just make it tweak down at the end maybe. And I'm also going to drop down the first section of the track, hit mixer and ping pong. I'm going to automate a delay. Now you could always map these controls via MIDI and automate and record in, but for the purpose of this tutorial I'm just going to do it manually with automation clicks, just so that you can see exactly what I'm doing. I'll throw a bit of reverb on here too. So let's have a listen. So there you go, that's what we call the simpler build-up, and as you can imagine, you don't just have to use it for build-ups or breakdowns. You can use it at any point during your track. Just bounce your audio down with a consolidation and drop it into a simpler and do whatever you want with it. It's really handy for glitchy edits, handy for just tweaking around your samples just to make them sound a bit more interesting. It really frees you up to do whatever you want to sculpt your audio.